Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fishin, the podcast where we discuss Modern's most competitive tribe and help the whole community become better Merfolk players. I'm Kody, one of the co-hosts of the show, and not Kody Smith on Twitter. And we have my co-host, Dorian. How are you doing, Dorian?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm tired, but you know that's the life that you live as an adult. Where can people find you on the internet?
I am at Crinkle Biscuit with a K. No. And yeah, that's more or less what we need to say about that.
And of course, you can find Matthew on Twitter as MatthewCotto8. He is busy managing people and going to school and doing all sorts of crazy nonsense like that. We would also like to welcome on, we have a special guest. We had him on a long time ago, very, very long time ago. I think maybe when we were in the first 20 episodes, I think. But we would like to welcome back Merfolk Master and YouTube content creator extraordinaire, Nikachu.
Thanks. It's me, Nikachu.
What's up, Nikachu?
Oh, things are going awesome. The stock of Merfolk is going up, both for Pioneer and Modern. I like where Merfolk is. I like the power that the green cards have given Simic Merfolk, and I'm very excited for Merfolk going into the future.
I really,
thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, no, it's been too long. We should really consider having you on slightly more often than once every 18 months. But remember that you thank you so much for listening and subscribing to wherever you find your podcast, as well as youtube.com/fishcastmtg. Those are all great places to listen to the show. And maybe one day we'll start streaming again. I don't know. I might actually I have tomorrow off work. I might just sit and mess with my computer and see if I can get things going. Remember to rate us in the Apple or Google Play podcast app stores, because that really helps people find us. And remember that your support on Patreon is vital to the success of this show. Our hosting fee is about to go up because we have literally just podcasted for over 150 hours. So our hosting will go up, unfortunately. So that is something that we need to take care of. So your monies definitely helps us do that. So thank you for all of our Patreon supporters. And remember, you can also support us by going to Inked Gaming and using code FishCast10 at checkout to get 10% off your order and kick back some of that money to your buddies over here. As well as, we haven't talked about it in a while, but Cardamajigs. Go to Cardamajigs and use code FishCast10 to get 10% off your order as well. We don't have any new patrons this week, so we asked Nikachu to pick the random Merfolk. And what number did you go with, Nikachu?
222.
So we went down the, we checked the annals of the Merfolk library, and we pulled up a really cool card from Dorian's favorite set, or Dorian's favorite block, I suppose. And it is a really cool one. Dorian, do you want to read this one?
Sure thing. It is Wanderbrine Root Cutters. It is out of the Shadowmoor set from Shadowmoor Lorwyn block, or Shadowmoor Eventide block. And it is 2 and 2 hybrid Dimir colors, so blue-black hybrid. And it is a Merfolk Rogue that can, or a 3/3, and it cannot be blocked by green creatures.
Yeah, and of course the flavor text. Most Dirtwalkers only know the vicious marrows that dwell in the shallows. They can't begin to fathom the wickedness that skulks in the dark meanders.
Nikachu, do you have any experience playing with this card, either in Limited or in Constructed at all?
I have none, but you know what? I'm going to throw it into a Troll Merfolk deck, and then I will have some experience. So this is anti-green, can't block. Yeah, the green creatures can't block this thing. I like it. I'm going to make some anti-green Merfolk deck.
I was going to say maybe an anti-Jund deck or something like that.
Yep. You'll have to throw in Hibernation as well, just for the fun of it.
All anti-green cards.
And or one thing you could do is throw in Trait Doctoring, and that way you could turn your opponent's creatures green, so then they can't block.
Yeah.
I think that might be a bridge too far. But I mean, this card seems fine and limited. Unless you're Merfolk and you're putting it in a troll deck, or unless you're Nikachu and putting it in a Merfolk troll deck, I doubt that this card really would see too much play.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that was usually played on curve. If you would bring it out of like your sideboard if you knew you were up against a heavy green deck and all. And yeah, for the most part, like, it's not much else to be said. It had, both the Merfolk and Rogue synergies. I think I saw it more on the Rogue side than I ever saw on the Merfolk.
And it has great art from Chippy. I definitely love this art. I love the deep, like the dark Merfolk. I think that's my favorite Merfolk art, really. It's just, they just look so evil and dirty, and it's so great. All right. So today's topic, we kind of this actually kind of came up a long time ago from one of our first Facebook followers, and he put out the idea. And I was just kind of browsing Facebook and just kind of going through all the old stuff, and he had an idea for, wanting to know what are some cards that we used to play in competitive Merfolk, and what has kind of come up to replace those cards. So I figured, since we're going to be talking about the history of Merfolk, at least the history of competitive Merfolk, who better to bring on the show than somebody who's been playing Merfolk basically as long as Merfolk has been a modern deck, at least in the competitive sense. And Nikachu kind of jumped out in both of our minds, both mine and Dorian. So Nikachu, being the Merfolk master that you are, we're going to pick your brain a little bit on these cards.
Awesome. It's time to go back down memory lane. Merfolk has definitely taken many different iterations, taken many different changes as new cards got printed or new archetypes were made.
Yeah, and it's been really cool to see how things change, and obviously some of these changes they're just strictly better upgrades, and some of it's based off of how the meta works. So it's really interesting to see like what is actually causing these cards to fall in or out of favor.
Yes. So I had asked you a little bit earlier in the day, like what were like the top 5 cards that got replaced, but seeing as how that there were a few others that could probably fit into these, top 5 lists that you had created for us, Nikachu, I'm going to include, a couple of them. And I would say the biggest change overall is our selection of counter spells, correct?
That's correct. Counterspells evolved many times over the history of Modern.
Yeah.
It also seems really recently that a lot of the counters. I mean, obviously we have Force of Negation that's the really big one, but it seems like we're running into less problems of having to find places for new Merfolk, and we're having to find places for new counterspells.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. It's a problem.
And do you think it's more of the fact that we have the better counter spells, or I would say at the very least when you were talking about how Swan Song and Negate got switched for Deprive, was that like, I know you talked about this in one of your videos on your channel, but if you would like to reiterate why you switched to Deprive for some of the other listeners here, and then if they want any more detail, they can, go check out your channel as well. Would you be willing to do that?
Oh yeah, sure. All right, so where should we start? What's the top of the list? The counterspells?
The top of the list, I would say, would be the counter spells, specifically like Unified Will, Remand, Swan Song being swapped for Deprive, and then we'll have Force and Negation kind of be its own topic.
Okay, so we can start off with the counterspells. Like Remand was actually a pretty incredible card at the time because it drew you a card. It got you a little bit further, deeper into gas. And it was a pretty good counterspell in a Splinter Twin, Scape Shift, Jeskai control era like Modern, when it got popular around 2000, I don't know, between 2013, 2014, even around 2015, it was clunky. I mean, it was a very clunky era. There wasn't anything. The only super fast deck was just Affinity. Affinity was the only really, really quick deck. But decks like Birthing Pod, Splinter Twin, the Control decks, even Jund, they were slow. They were like really, really slow. And the most important thing for Merfolk was just to tempo them out a little bit, which you could do with Remand. And that would be the difference between like winning and losing a lot of games. I mean, to be able to Remand a Splinter Twin would draw you a card, then you draw into another card, and you might not have enough gas now to like attack for victory in the end. But it was really important against decks like Birthing Pod, for example, where if they play like, I don't know, turn 2 or turn 3 Kitchen Finks, you remand it and you start drawing more cards. So remand was good at a period of time when cards were really clunky, really slow, and you need to like draw into more stuff. And it slowly fell out of favor as Modern became more mana efficient. And, you know, remanding a 1 mana spell or a 2 mana spell, not worth it so much. And over time, remand just started losing more and more value as, you know, as more sets get added to the card pool, and more sets get added to the card pool, and the mana cost of everything starts to shrink. So that got replaced by we need more hard counter spells. So what are we looking for? Well, eventually we moved to like negate, something that was pretty good against burn and also pretty good against what's it called? Like a lot of the combo decks. It was 2 mana. It also replaced Swan Song. Swan Song was just like the hard answer against things like Team or Scape Shift. That was a pretty big deck at the time. It was like okay against burn, but not great. But anyway, it was considered better than negate at the time. But then eventually I decided, you know what? I really need a hard counter against burn. I don't want to counter, I don't know, a Boros Charm and give them a 2/2 creature. Why not play with negate? And negate ended up doing wonders. It was incredible. It countered like every non-creature spell, which was mostly important. And it was a hard counter, and it was a little bit more clunky than Swan Song, but you know, it doesn't matter. Like we played with Remand in the past, holding up 2 mana, not too bad. So yeah, we started to run negate. Now the problems with negate is that you couldn't counter creatures. So you know, you look at things like Titan Shift. What can I can counter Scape Shift with negate, but I can't counter Primeval Titan. I can counter Summoner's Pact, but still I can't counter Primeval Titan. So there'd be some number of games that you just snap lose because they play the Primeval Titan and you only have negate. What else was a really big problem for negate? Can't think of it off the top of my head.
I mean, it doesn't stop that combo. I mean, obviously that was a different time, but I mean, Splinter Twin was a creature combo, so it just kind of sits there and does nothing to it.
Well, you counter Splinter Twin itself, but it wasn't that at the same time, that's not the greatest value. The best thing would be to like Vapor Snag or dismember the creature that the Splinter Twin is actually targeting. But I'm missing another archetype. Maybe I'm thinking of Counter's Company. Like Counter's Company was a problem for negate because you can't counter either Devoted Druid or Vizier of Remedies. So there was a time I did go for Unified Will. It was a card that could counter things from Amulet Titan, from Titan Shift, and Ad Nauseam. Those were 3 big decks at one moment, and Unified Will was just a good catch-all answer to anything any of those 3 decks would play, and I would almost always have more creatures. But then surprisingly, you know, what was good all along, well, probably good all along, was Deprive. Deprive was a fantastic answer to Titan Shift, to Counter's Company, but also importantly to Blue-White Control. And this card got really popular as M. Hayashi was putting like league victory after league victory after league victory with this card. And I play tested with it a little bit in the past, and I played not many leagues, maybe like 2 leagues, and I wasn't impressed. I had like I remember I just ran really bad with the card, like in retrospect. And I saw that there were some obvious faults with it. Like if I have Cavernous Souls and Island, I can't cast it. If I have to play it really early on in the game, maybe it'll set me back. If I have Mutavault Island, I can't cast it. So anyway, I just scrapped it because part of playtesting is you gotta try to generalize whatever you can from very small sample sizes. But anyway, I generalized wrong. M. Hayashi ended up showing us, hey, Deprive actually is just Unified Will, Negate, Swan Song, all these cards combined. Deprive is hands down better than all of them. 2 blue is not that hard. Most of the time you're casting it on turns like 4 anyway, when you're definitely going to have double blue up. So and in the end, Deprive just ended up replacing everything.
And I think another thing that was kind of really big with Deprive at least was at least in my mind that kind of pushed it over for me was the printing of Merfolk Trickster. It just gave us more options. So like, okay, we could hold this up, but basically before Merfolk Trickster, there weren't a lot of options for us to go, oh, I could do something else with this mana.
Yeah, in the past it was like super hard. So now the combination of a hard counter plus Merfolk Trickster was it put the ball in our court significantly.
Dorian, do you have anything to add about these counter spells or Deprive in general?
No, not really. I mean, a lot of my thoughts on Deprive were influenced, and majorly influenced because of what you had said about it on one of your previous videos when you first started playtesting with it. And then, I was taking that kind of information, playing in my local metagame, taking it to like some of the bigger events, having moderate success with it. Nothing to get me into like the top 8 or anything, but still, I was having more wins than losses, I would say. So yeah, I mean, you've basically hit every nail on the head with regards to why Deprive has been the better option. Because I think I asked you at one time also about why Deprive over Familiar's Ruse, which is a similar blue counter spell.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of returning a land, you are returning a creature.
Yes, but unfortunately, when you return a creature, you're like really setting your clock back, and it's so important to have permanence in play. Like in practice, let's say you have to like put on the brakes. You can't tap out anymore because you need to hold up your counter spells. Now, when you play your counter spell, you end up taking your clock away from the board, and you now make it that much more painful to redeploy your creatures. So that there's a lot of situations where you just don't want to bring like creatures back to your hand.
Yes. Yeah, and not to mention, if you have no creatures in play, it's just a dead card in your hand.
Mm-hmm. That's true as well.
But second counter spell on the list was you were talking about Spell Pierce has pretty much been replaced by Force Negation.
Yeah, for the time being, it doesn't look like Spell Pierce has a really good place right now, even though it's pretty mana efficient. It's still a good card, but it's just hard to squeeze in room for Spell Pierce because Force Negation basically does the same thing. And I don't want to count Spell Pierce completely out, but I mean, basically, Force Negation does what Spell Pierce does, but it's for free, and you can tap out, and it's just a much more powerful spell. The only thing, Force Negation, by far and large, one of the best counterspells printed now for Modern in general, hence the price tag, and has helped Merfolk a lot because we are a deck that wants to tap out at least for a few turns up to turn 4 to apply pressure on the opponent, and not to mention one of our greatest nemesis is any sort of sweeper our opponent plays. So if we can apply a lot of pressure to the battlefield and our opponent taps out to play a sweeper and we can counter it for free, huge bonus to us. So Spell Pierce can't do that ever. Now, one thing I don't want to count Spell Pierce out of is being able to counter things on our turn. I've found that against more experienced players, Force Negation can get really awkward because my opponent will just play their spells on my turn and not on their turn. So that means Force Negation is never free. And I always have to... it just turns into a 3-mana negate, which is also not good. So I don't see a spot for Spell Pierce right now. Ever since Force Negation came out, it just hasn't been played. But anyway, so it looks right now Force Negation has basically replaced Spell Pierce, but I could see in some worlds Spell Pierce coming back in some numbers.
Do you think that it'll be like a split between Force Negation and Spell Pierce, or do you think if Spell Pierce is good or the metagame, Force Negation would not be?
It's hard to imagine a metagame where Force Negation is truly so poor that we're playing like less than 3. I could maybe see playing 3 in the 75, but I don't know if I could see myself playing less than 3. I mean, it's possible. I always try to have an open mind with Merfolk. Like, anything is possible. None of the numbers are set in stone. So yeah, maybe the split is possible, but I would more look at it like I have 4 Force Negation and I have 2 Spell Pierce and maybe 2 Deprive, and that might be my entire counter package. I look at it as more as an addition to Force Negation in the matchups where I really need it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like you said, unfortunately, sometimes if your opponent's wise to your plan, they can just make you pay the full for Force Negation, and then you're like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I unfortunately still have not touched a Force of Negation in my life. I do need to get them eventually at some point, but I agree with all your points, and I do think that at some point, like you said, that there will be some form of Spell Pierce kind of rolling around in the meta, and it's still good, just not right now.
All right, so you've never touched Force Negations before?
I think I've maybe touched your Force of Negations.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, you can touch mine anytime you want, but
I've never owned Force of Negations. But without making the show more inappropriate than it already is, what is the next card that we're going to be discussing?
Yes. So another one that you had brought up, Nikachu, was Vapor Snag being the quintessential like bounce spell for the longest time, but having since been replaced by more, I guess, adaptive bounce spells like Echoing Truth. I would say like Brazen Borrower's Adventure like instant as it being another one. And then I want to say there was like another one you talked about. If you can remember and all, but virtually anything that could answer like problematic enchantments and ensnaring bridge, to be sure.
Yeah, so some other cards I've also played as bounce spells are things like Venser, Shaper Savant, and Cryptic Command. And Cryptic Command also doubled as a counter spell, but I mostly played Cryptic Command because it was a bounce spell. Not actually, I didn't care for it to be, well, I mean, why would I play a 4-mana counter spell? But Vapor Snag. Vapor Snag used to be core to Merfolk. It's an incredibly good card. It still is. You can, for 1 mana, bounce your opponent's creatures, and you can bounce the expensive ones. I mean, even today you can bounce like Urza's stupid construct token. Like that's not bad.
I think that's the name of it too.
And yeah. And they lose a life, and for very cheaply, you can protect your own creatures by bouncing them back to your hand and then redeploying them with Ether Vial. So it's like a really very, very mana efficient card for answering the creatures on the board and also protecting yours. But the ultimate problem with this card is when Ensnaring Bridge decks got really popular, especially starting with Mardu Pyromancer, when that deck was starting to come on the rise. And So you need to have some answer to Ensnaring Bridge. If you don't, you're just like forfeiting way too many games. And I'm like, I've said this like a million times on my channel. I hate Echoing Truth. I absolutely hate this card because it like I said, 90% of the time you're just doing what Vapor Snag does, but it's 2 mana, and that 2 mana is like a worlds of difference from 1 mana. So I always looked at this as a strictly worse Vapor Snag. But it bounces Ensnaring Bridge, and that's all that mattered at some point. And the number of like Ensnaring Bridge decks started to increase, or the frequency that I was seeing Ensnaring Bridge increase. Like it was also Lantern Control started to become a very serious deck. I started seeing that much more often online. I still see it online. So eventually I started. I mean, I personally didn't. I played Echoing Truth for some time until I said, I'm sick of this card. I'm playing with Venser, and then I started seeing some very good success. I really liked Venser as a bounce spell. That was pretty good. And then I also played around with Cryptic Command, also a card that I thought was so good. I ended up playing, I think, 4 of them in the main deck for one particular build at one time. But the point is, at some point you have to answer Ensnaring Bridge, and right now Ensnaring Bridge is a sort of a crux of Modern. A lot of decks are being built around Ensnaring Bridge. They still are. So you need to have an answer into Ensnaring Bridge. And if you have these other bounce spells, whether it be Echoing Truth, Venser, Cryptic Command, Brazen Borrower, there's no room to have Vapor Snag at the same time. I just don't see it's just not worth the slots. Ensnaring Bridge is such an I win card. You can't afford to play with even a split of 2 Vapor Snag, 2 Brazen Borrower. You might as well just go all 4 Brazen Borrower or all 4 Echoing Truth if you play Echoing Truth. Basically, there's just no room for Vapor Snag because the threat of Ensnaring Bridge winning the game is just too stupidly strong when you end up facing it. So like Vapor Snag just it's not going to come back until Ensnaring Bridge goes away.
And I don't think it'll go away.
I don't think it's going to go away either, unfortunately.
And then the last card you had on your list as well was one that kind of surprised me, but then it made sense the more I thought about it, was Tectonic Edge.
Yeah, Tectonic Edge, I love this card. I have a lot of good memories with Tectonic Edge because Tectonic Edge and Spreading Seas are such good buddies. Just taking off a 3 or 4 color deck off their colors and then just turning them into a mono blue deck, or just turning them into a 2 color deck when they're supposed to be more the 3, 4 or 5 colors. So the Tectonic Edge was incredibly good tech a long time ago, back in the Jeskai Control days, where you tried to turn them into a mono blue deck. They demanded double white for Supreme Verdict, but you Spreading Seas 1 white source. You Tectonic Edge the other one. They have no more white sources. Can't do anything with their red mana against Master of Waves. You get a lot of devotion. It was very good against the old Scape Shift decks because as they slowly try to get to 8 mana, you start just tearing them down with the Tectonic Edge. And occasionally you just take them off the mana necessary for them to play Anger of the Gods or something like that. And was also really good tech against Tron. And I would still say it's good against Tron, but it's probably only good against Tron these days, and not as effective against other archetypes. So the deal is, over time, 3-color control decks are basically dead. They're all gone. We don't see Jeskai Control anymore. We don't really see Grixis Control anymore. The only control deck we see now is Blue-White Control, and the card is certainly fine there, but not great. It's harder to get more value out of it. You can't play it early because if you do, they'll Field of Ruin it, and that's not good. So you have to sandbag this card. It's a 2-color deck, so you can't really expect to color screw them. I just really like to play Tectonic Edge as a way of killing a Colonnade, or maybe a Search for Azcanta. Well, they don't even play Search for Azcanta anymore, so that's not even a card. That's not even a land you can try to kill off with Tectonic Edge. So it's not that good against control anymore. And so and what else is there? Titan Shift, it's okay. but not that great. They've got like a million lands. And Modern has also gotten so fast that, well, yeah, Tectonic Edge was better at a time when Modern was slower, and we played our land drops. We put 4 or more lands into play, and it mattered. That doesn't matter nearly as much as it used to. Not to mention, like, what do I want to say? Yeah, Tectonic Edge it's just not very well positioned anymore. It's not worth the slots. And I actually should say that Deprive actually helped kill Tectonic Edge. So, like, Tectonic Edge was sort of good at preventing our opponent from maybe playing the top end of their deck. But now it doesn't even matter because Deprive will just counter everything. Like, even Tectonic Edge kept people off of getting to their, like getting to 6 mana to play Snapcaster Mage into Cryptic Command. I mean, that was serious, and Tectonic Edge took people off of being able to do that. But now you just deprive the Snapcaster Mage, and you don't even worry about it. So you don't care as much about cutting people off of the top end of their deck for their big spells, because now you can actually just counter them.
Would you say in that instance you just said, is it better to counterspell the Snapcaster Mage or the Cryptic Command when they try to cast it?
Oh, the Snapcaster Mage, because if you counter the Cryptic Command, then they at least have a 2/1 body on the battlefield, and I would just rather they have nothing. So they sort of, I guess they don't 2-for-1 you. I don't know how to quantify that. They play a Snapcaster Mage, and we basically discard a Deprive. I don't know. So a viewer can basically tell us, what kind of exchange happened here. But if I deprive the Snapcaster Mage, then it's just a 1-for-1. Whereas if I deprive the Cryptic Command, they've got something on the battlefield.
I see. And my thinking on it was more of that, letting them have that Snapcaster Mage and all, because when they tried to cast the Cryptic Command, they'd potentially be tapped out, and then having them tapped out and countering like a spell they needed felt a little bit better in my head, at least. But
there's some niche situations where that would be true. Like if you can kill your opponent next turn, like if you're going to win next turn, then there's nothing wrong with letting Snapcaster Mage resolve, because it doesn't kill you, and try to encourage your opponent to just soak up more mana and get themselves to tap out, because then they can't do anything about you beating them next turn. But if you have any expectation of the game lasting longer than 1 turn, then Snapcaster Mage is always like a problem, because if you ever attack into a Snapcaster Mage, it can trade with a creature, or there's always this awful threat of the opponent, like lightning bolting, or like Path to Exiling, or just killing your Island Walk Lord, and then Snapcaster Mage trades with something else on the battlefield. So yeah, if you can kill them by next turn, then by all means let them try to what's the expression? Like, give them rope to hang themselves with.
All right, makes perfect sense. But going back to Tectonic Edge, though, so would you say Damping Sphere has kind of taken the Tectonic Edge slot?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if there was any big mana deck, and I mean, I definitely played some Tectonic Edges against Amulet Titan. Not that it was like very good. I don't really play with Damping Sphere that much, although I'm gonna start playing with it recently, just because it's good against Amulet, good against Eldrazi Tron, fine against Tron as well. It's good replacement. It's good replacement. It's a modern day solution to modern day problems.
I mean, you have to be where your feet are, and if these are the problems we're facing, then just got to find the correct answer for the current problem. So I agree with that.
Yeah, too many of these big mana decks are just doing too much with like less than 4 lands. So Tectonic Edge is just sort of a sitting duck, whereas that Damping Sphere works immediately.
And aside from this list that you had sent, was there anything that almost made the list but decided not to put it on there because, as we were, talking offline, you were saying basically wanted to remind everybody Merfolk is a toolbox deck, essentially. And then could you kind of explain that for some of the newer listeners?
Yeah, so like Merfolk, its power, its key advantage over a lot of other archetypes in Modern is that it's a toolbox deck. So that means you can customize it perfectly tuned to have a very big advantage against your metagame, whether your metagame is heavy on burn, heavy on Tron, heavy on control, heavy on certain combo decks, heavy on attrition-based decks. You can tune the deck to the right specifications to have a big advantage against them. So there's no general Merfolk deck out there. I mean, some of them might look like it for an open metagame, but for a very narrow metagame, your list might and justifiably so look very, very different. So cards come in and out all the time based on what the metagame is or what your metagame is. As it changes, you should be changing the deck. So the core cards are, well, they shake up pretty often. There's like a bunch of niche cards. They come in and out, like all the time as Modern, or as the metagame changes, or as like your metagame changes.
I almost forgot one that you put on the list. I was looking at something else. So I completely skipped Curse Catcher and all. To at least be fair to your list and all, I am pretty outspoken that Curse Catcher is the best one drop in the Merfolk shell. But
you're also very insistent on being wrong.
Oh. It was good in the blue-white list I played, so.
To be a little bit fair to Curse Catcher is probably better now than it has been in an incredibly long time. Because you can like slow down Amulet Titan a little bit when they try to cast Summoner's Pact. And Burn was sort of around, but Burn just like recently died thanks to Oko, Thief of Crowns. So I don't know how well Burn is doing so.
Just slapping multiple formats with just a giant elk, just grabbing an elk by its four hooves and just smacking every single format that it comes to.
Elks everywhere. So the deal with Curse Catcher is, traditionally, like I said, Modern was really clunky in the beginning, and that made a really big difference for Curse Catcher. There weren't a lot of 1-mana spells. Electrolyze and Cryptic Command were some of the big spells that you saw out of Jeskai Control and Splinter Twin. Those were really common to defeat. And what made them even more clunky is when your opponent tries to Snapcaster Mage them back, so they need to get to 5 mana to snap back Electrolyze. They need to get to 6 mana to snap back Cryptic Command. Well, if you've got like a Curse Catcher on the battlefield, that seems like an eternity, and that makes it so much more backbreaking and so much harder for them to be able to achieve that. Not to mention back in the day, I was playing with Tectonic Edge, so that even made it even harder to like Snapcaster Mage, get those cards back, get that real value that they want out of Electrolyze and Cryptic Command. So Curse Catcher really slowed people down a long time ago. But like we said with things like Remand getting poorer over time because of the mana efficiency of Modern, the same thing happened with Curse Catcher. So, but like Curse Catcher got attacked on multiple angles. So first off, Modern became more mana efficient, so has way more 1 mana and 2 mana spells to deal with, which is a little bit too much for to ask of Curse Catcher. But the next big problem is that the most problematic cards were not instants and sorceries anymore. They started to become planeswalkers, like Teferi Time Reveler, Teferi Hero of Dominaria, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Liliana the Last Hope, and then there's things like there's artifacts that we can't deal with, like Ensnaring Bridge. Then there's some enchantments that we can't deal with but very well, with Search for Iskanta, Detention Sphere. So all of a sudden there was just a swarm of new threats. They need to be answered, or we're like just gonna die. And Curse Catcher does nothing against any of them. So when I feel like in the past when I had Curse Catcher against a control deck, I was fist pumping this card is great. It's going to slow down my opponent by a lot. It's going to deal damage incrementally over time. And now Curse Catcher against Blue Eye Control is just a dead card, and I know, and they don't even care. They'll just take hits from Curse Catcher for, I don't know, for as long as they want, or sometimes it gets stone blocked by like a Wall of Omens. So it just over time just became obsolete. It couldn't counter anything, and when I recognized that, I eventually like just took out all the Curse Catchers and replaced them with Spell Pierces. But now we've got a new Curse Catcher. It's Benthic Biomancer. Very similar to Curse Catcher, but at least it can like get a little bit bigger, and it can loot away a card. I was not impressed when Benthic Biomancer came out, but I have to admit that it's just whatever. It's just good enough to play. I still don't really like the card. It's not good. Like, it's playable, but it's not good. But I do look at Curse Catcher as basically unplayable because it just doesn't scale as Modern has scaled. Oh, there's other things like Counters Company. You can't counter anything out of that deck. And they have so much mana that you can't expect to like counter things like Collected Company.
Yeah, and it just I remember when Ben came out, that I was not only excited to play him with Mirror Regery so I could have a Merfolk deck called Ben and Jerry's, but
Nice.
But the other thing, at least in my mind, was just, basically everything that you said about Curse Catcher was, the boogeyman at that point was kind of blue-white control, and that also gave us another reason to play Deprive. It was another way that we could spend that 2 mana. If we held up the mana for Deprive, we could do something with it. And so it's like, okay, cool. End of turn, you do nothing. All right, cool. I'm going to cash this in real quick, and I'm gonna get rid of this extra land or the second vial I drew and get a relevant card. And I think that that's where it shined the most, I guess, was against the blue-eye control matchup.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do we have any other cards that we need to discuss before we move on to the deck shout out?
So one that I was thinking of was Spellskite. I know it was something that was really big during the Splinter Twin days and all, but it has. Would you say it's gone back into like the toolbox type of category, or has it become obsolete as you described the other 5?
So Spellskite was a really popular option before I started making Merfolk content. So it turns out Spellskite was just a terribly awful card. It doesn't really do what you want it to do. So how can I put it? Like, a lot of people say, well, it's a magnet for a removal spell. Well, then just play another Merfolk and let it be the magnet for the removal spell. So against control decks, they could literally ignore it until it was important. Or you just like commit a creature for no reason to the board. So let's say you're up against Jeskai Control and they play, and you play Spellskite. They're like, okay, sure, you have a Spellskite. And then you play 1 Merfolk and they're like, yeah, I don't care. Then you realize, well, now you need to add more creatures to the battlefield. Okay, so I play a second Merfolk. I now have 3 permanents on the battlefield. Then they're like, okay, Supreme Verdict, sweep them all away. So Spellskite actually just encourages you to just play more creatures than you want to against a Supreme Verdict deck. And it's so it was just really popular at a time before people knew better. It was never a good card in the Merfolk deck. It's not part of my toolbox. I've almost never played it. I know there's some people that like it. It does hose some decks like Boggles, Infect occasionally. No, like it's a good card against Infect too. But my argument is that in any of the matchups where it's good, I would rather have Chalice of the Void because I actually think it's better. So I think Chalice of the Void is better against Infect. I think Chalice of the Void it's debatable whether it's better or on par against the Boggles deck. Because certainly, like, taking all the enchantments are good as well. But you do.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to interrupt and say, like, even though like what you said, like, okay, so it's good against Infect, it's good against Boggles, but those are not decks that you see all that often, like at high level events. So like you're basically preparing yourself for a problem that you're not as likely to run into.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like very specifically for those decks. And just like going back to the Splinter Twin thing, they didn't necessarily have to like play Twin. And I think they brought in some artifact destruction. I can't remember. But like a lot of games just sort of came down to playing like Vendilion Click and attack you, and playing a Pestermite attack. And then all of a sudden you have this Pestermite, you have this Spellskite on the board. It was, I guess there was, if you viled in Spellskite and then got your opponent, it was like the greatest thing in the world. But if you play Spellskite face up, your opponent can play around it. It's like, it's not the end of the world. If they're not expecting it, it's good, but you can't. Most of the games you're not going to have a vial onto ready to get your opponent, and I think that made it hard for a lot of people to move on from Spellskite. But I've never been a proponent of Spellskite. Yeah. Basically.
And again, going back to the toolbox aspect of Merfolk, if for some reason you live in a meta where there's lots of Boggles and lots of Infect, go for it. But the average Merfolk deck, it's not going to be that big of an issue. We do want to get you out of here on time, Nikachu. I know you're on a time crunch. Dorian, can we look at the deck that we can that we're highlighting today? Are you ready for the deck highlight?
Yes. So this deck that we are highlighting today is a Simic Merfolk list from Eric Quiroga and all. He made second place at the Star City Games IQ in Danbury. Well, nice. So congrats on the invitational qualifier.
Yes.
Congrats, Eric.
Yep.
Well, and this list is like pretty. I want to kind of say it's expensive. For my taste, it's like almost $700 based on Card Kingdom prices. I'm not
Force
gonna.
Negation will do that.
Yes. Well, that he's also running 3 Oko Thief of Crowns.
That'll do it too.
Yep, the Oko has become pretty much a staple in the Simic lists, for as long as he's legal and modern.
Why is Oko in the Simic list?
Because he can...
No, you don't have to answer that question.
No, what was it? I think I saw it on the Discord. Somebody, turned their Aether Vial, an extra Aether Vial, into an elk to swing for lethal.
Beautiful.
No, yeah, that's what I mean. Is in almost every situation, Oko is good. So it's like, okay, worst case scenario, you've got an extra Aether Vial hanging around. Boop, you're an elk now.
Yeah, boop.
But this list, I think, is pretty cool. They have 2 breeding pool, the 4 sanctums. They're playing all 4 of the cracklands, and then they're using 2 brazen borrowers, which is
That's brazen.
Yep. I think it's pretty cool. Do you think brazen borrower is going to be something that stays in the list for Merfolk going forward, or is that going to be like a flex spot that brazen is just currently taking the place of?
I think it might end up being a flex spot for Simic. I certainly still play it and like it. It's a really great hedge against Plague Engineer because it's a fairy. It still bounces Ensnaring Bridge. Oko can deal with Ensnaring Bridge, but if your opponent plays Sorcerous Spyglass or Pithing Needle or something, then it won't. And against artifact decks, you always have to be wary of that effect. So Brazen Borrower is like an extra way of hedging against that sort of risk. again, in mono blue, I think it's going to be a staple. Like, you still need to deal with ensnaring bridge, and that might be hands down the best way of doing it. It's a bounce spell, or it's a 3/1 flyer in the air. I really like the card in that regard.
All right, and which would you say is the better Brazen Borrower, the storybook version, or the normal one that you can open up in the Throne of Eldraine packs?
Oh, the storybook one, hands down.
For sure.
No, I don't like that other one at all. It's a really bad picture. It's like I mean, I don't want to slam the artist or anything, but like the design, it's like the design was made to like encourage people to work extra hard to go get the storybook version.
No love for the fairy carrying the health potion, I see. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I think the last thing we got is just the opening hand that is going to be done with Kody, and then we'll be done for the night.
The opening hand, man. Yeah, so I've got an opening hand here that I've drawn. I think you both are going to like this hand a lot. So again, even episodes, so we're on the play. So this is against an unknown opponent. I mean, obviously we wouldn't know who it is if you're at a major event. But we still don't sideboard even if we're on the draw. It's just one of those things that we don't take into consideration. There's too many factors. So
we registered 60 cards.
Yeah, we registered 60 cards 75 cards, I guess. The hand that we have is an island, a Cavern of Souls, an Aether Vial, a Benthic Biomancer, a Lord of Atlantis, a Harbinger of Tides, and a Marrow Regery.
Let's see. So the only non-creature spell is Aether Vial?
That's correct.
I'd keep it.
I honestly think, yeah, against an unknown opponent, this is something I would keep. I mean, it has a good curve to it. We obviously don't know what's coming, but with Aether Vial being able to tick up, that's not too terrible. Obviously, this is a slightly outdated list. I haven't had a lot of time to play Magic, so my list has kind of gone, I guess, unattended as well as it should. Nikachu, what do you think about that opening 7?
I think it's actually a premium hand. I think it's really good. You have something on the curve for every single turn. You can go like turn 1 Aether Vial, turn 2 Lord of Atlantis, and also put a Benthic Biomancer in play. And then by turn 3, you'll have the Vial on 2, so you'll have Harbinger of the Tides up if necessary. If you peel a land, you play Marrow Regery. If you don't peel a land, well, pending what you draw, I mean, I don't know what you like. You're in a situation really where everything is good, actually. I mean, if you peel a land, you play the Regery. If you don't peel a land, then you probably have like a creature that you can just play hard cast anyway.
There's also the adapt option for Benthic Biomancer as well.
Yeah, if somehow you draw a Force Negation, and it's really bad in this matchup, you just pitch that thing away, get in for some extra damage. And there's also the option, maybe even ticking the Vial up to 3, Vial in the Regery, then hard cast the Harbinger of the Tides, tapping something, bouncing it to your opponent's hand. So the hand has a great curve, great tempo. Yeah, I love it.
And there's no way that we would have known this, but the next card that we would draw was Master of the Pearl Trident, which I think still fits this game plan. So I would not be upset to see a Master of the Pearl Trident at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great.
All right, yeah, so I think we're all in agreement that is a keepable opening 7. Remember to find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook as FishcastMTG. If you have a longer form question, you can feel free to email us at fishcastmtg@gmail.com. Our cover art was made by Tessa and Hunter Pruitt, and our logo and stream art was done by Ishton on Twitter, with our animated intro for our videos done by Jake Boss MTG. If you like what we're doing here, please rate and subscribe in the Apple or Google Play Podcast app, as well as support us on Patreon at patreon.com/fishcastmtg. Nikachu, I'm sure if the people are listening to this, then they know where to find you, but where are all your social medias at?
Nikachu MTG on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, even though I don't use it very much. Nikachu MTG all around.
Can we expect to see you on TikTok anytime soon?
I don't have any idea how that works. You know what? I tried to get into Snapchat at one time, and I'm like, I don't know how to snap anything. How does this app work? It was so frustrating. I think I even consulted Google, and it didn't even help me very well. And I was like, okay, to hell with it. I'm not doing it. It discouraged me from anything that looked like Snapchat for the future.
I'd say TikTok is more like Vine, like Vine was, but and I honestly didn't get too into Vine either. I do have a TikTok. I just don't know what I could ever do with it. That's not a creative muscle that my body has, I think.
I have a lot of creativity, but you know what? If I don't know how to use the app, then none of that creativity is going to come out.
That's
maybe
fair.
TikTok is easier. I don't know, but my hands are full with just Facebook and Twitter, as far as I'm concerned.
That's fine. Dorian, any closing statements?
No, not so much. Thank you again, Nikachu, for coming back onto the show. This is the first time you and I have interacted, I would say in a professional manner.
Wait, you're calling this show professional?
I've talked to Nikachu offline, I think, once or twice, because it was before I started listening to the show, and, Nikachu being the Merfolk master, it was like, is this card good? And then he would say yes or no, and here's why. And then I would, take that information and go play it like an F&M or like an IQ or something like that. Oh.
All right. Thank you again, Nikachu. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we will see everybody next week.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.